In other words, checkmate. You guys remember the movie? You guys remember the movie Independence Day? This came out back in the 90s. Remember when Jeff Goldblum's character was talking to, I guess, his boss at the cable company, and he's like, and his boss is like, "Well, what's next?" And then, you know, his character goes, "Checkmate." And then his boss goes, oh my God, David, I need to call my mother. I need to tell her to go to Atlanta. Like, it's funny. It's just hilarious because that's basically what's going on. It's checkmates. Checkmate. Because they're basically saying, yo, you guys think that you guys got us by the throat on the world stage. Well, meanwhile, we got you by the balls. I know I'm a little bit late on this, but I wanted to talk about this because this was extremely interesting, and it's really going to have a big effect on us on the world stage. So let's talk about it. BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are a block of nations that have come together in order to circumvent Western hegemony, Western influence, and declare their own self-determination and sovereignty within their own borders by teaming up with one another so that they can have less persecution from the West. And so a lot of people right now are having their eyes peeled on what's the next move from this block of nations that has been coming together and trying to maneuver things so that they can no longer be held basically by the throat of the West, by the West. So as far as what's going on right now, there has been a couple of weeks ago a meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa, where the BRICS nations actually held a summit where they actually came together to talk about an expansion of BRICS. So beyond, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now it is expanded officially to from 5 nations to 11 nations. That's right. It is more than double in size, which now has the Western nations shaking in their boots. So let's get into it. So first of all, I can't believe I'm doing this, but it's going to get done. Look, I got to do this. There's a song that actually goes in line with this. You guys are going to crack up, but I'm going to do it. We're going to show it. And so I cannot wait. So let's share this. All right. So let me get this ready. Because when I heard this, I was just like, no way. Somebody didn't make a song about BRICS. And lo and behold, they did. So yeah, let me share this with you guys because you guys are going to crack up. All right. So, and I don't think I've seen anybody else share this. So this is going to be hilarious. So let's go.
BRICS. Brazil BRICS, Russian BRICS, the Indian BRICS, Chinese BRICS, South Africa BRICS. They ain't talking Gucci man, but they've been talking BRICS. So these 5 countries came together with the intent to make America's dollar equivalent to 0 cent. If that happened, even wealthy people won't even be rich, because everything we've ever known quadruples in the expense. Picture this, for 1 BRICS dollar, America needs 55, which means they gonna overcharge for all of their supplies. The Jordans made in China, price range by different size. You will have to multiply that price range by 55. Do the math. 300 times 55 equals more people struggling to survive. Equals more robberies, crime super high. Equals more people in danger, more people die. The power of the American dollar is at stake, because they want to dethrone our dollar till it deflates, which means everything you buy or own will inflate. So the lifestyles we've grown to know plan. Find a couple friends and all of y'all pitch it for some land. Learn to plan, learn to be a natural human once again. Because wherever bricks begin, America wealth could end. Brick.
What? Gucci Homan. BRICS. Oh man, yo, so this is what's going on. Okay, so let's get serious because this is actually something I think a lot of people really need to be up to speed on when it comes to the world stage as far as U.S. hegemony and how in Western hegemony and how the world basically saying, especially those in the global South, no more are you guys going to be calling the shots of the world. So BRICS nations, of course, like I said before, met in Johannesburg, South Africa last few weeks, and they approved recently the countries of Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. So now those countries are going to be joining, and the official membership starts this January. So January of 2024. So we're going to go to Twitter, and there is a video that's shared by Hotspot of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who actually makes the official announcement. So this is going to be the South African president that actually makes the official announcement. And we'll get into there, and we'll start there, and then we will continue on. Let's begin.
As the 5 BRICS countries, we have reached agreement on the guiding principles, standards, criteria, and procedures of the BRICS expansion process, which has been in discussion for quite a while. We have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process, and other phases will follow.
So I want you guys to pay close attention because he said that was the first phase. First phase. And other phases will follow. So this is a very important point because a lot of times people think, well, BRICS will happen. It'll be just these member nations. And then that's what is going to be going forward. BRICS said, look, we are expanding. But if you guys think that this is going to be it, no. In the words of P. Diddy of Bad Boy, I thought I told you that we won't stop. I thought I told you that we won't stop. So this is what's going on as far as BRICS. This is why we need to pay attention and keep our eyes peeled on the developments of BRICS on the world stage as we move forward because it's going to grow. So let's continue and let's see more of what President Ramaphosa says.
Will follow. We have decided to invite the Argentine Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become full members of BRICS. The membership will take effect from the 1st of January 2024.
So there you have it. Confirmation from the horse's mouth from the president of South Africa himself, a BRICS member. So this is what's happening. This is going to be massive. This is huge news that really a lot of people just are not really aware of. And so some people are kind of scared. They're saying, well, if this happens, then our prices are going to go up exponentially, things like that. This may be a little bit more further off, just to quell some of the concern, but really the concern really should be to the government themselves, as well as to the wealthy and the corporations within the West, I think. So yeah, so massive developments really that are happening on the world stage. So I'm going to be sharing, actually I already have it up. So I'm going to be sharing this article that's going to go a little bit more in depth about it. So this is going to be out of the New York Times. I know, yes, they are corporate media, but they actually give a little bit more detail about this, which I want to get into. And so we will dissect through the corporate media just to glean the facts. So it says the BRICS group announces new members expanding its reach. Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia have been invited to join the club of emerging nations, strengthening its role as a geopolitical alternative to Western-led forums. Let's get into it. So, Sasal says the five-nation BRICS club of emerging economies that came together to tilt the international order away from the West announces plans Thursday to expand its membership, feeding concerns about a growing global divide. Says the group said that Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have been invited to join, and that their membership would begin in January. The BRICS group announced that the expansion at a summit in South Africa that attracted a level of global interest rarely seen since its first meeting back in 2009. Back then, the group's name was BRIC, an acronym coined by economists at Goldman Sachs to describe a group developing nations with rapidly growing economies and populations. So that was Brazil, China, India, and Russia. South Africa would join a year later, adding the S to the acronym. Now, it is a formalized group that seeks to challenge the dominance of Western-led forums like the Group of Seven or the G7 and the World Bank. It says, but leaders of the member states have repeatedly said they do not want direct competition with these groupings, but rather to bring diversity amid increasing polarization. So, Xi Jinping, president of China, says this membership expansion is historic. It shows the determination of BRICS countries for unity and cooperation for the broader developing world. So that's what's going on in regards to BRICS as well. This now, as the expansion goes, this group stands to be more economically powerful than the G7. Now, as somebody who is still learning about foreign policy myself, some people may not know exactly what the G7 is. And some of you do know because you are more foreign policy astute, geopolitically astute as to what it is. But some people just do not know. So I would like to go in and actually talk about what the G7 is so that people can know what it is and why it's so important. So let's go here. So as people may know, the G7 stands for Group of Seven. So I just want to share this. So, I still had it up already. Okay. So let me share my screen really quick to share with you guys who the G7 is and why it's so important. That they're basically being beaten economically. What's this? Oh, okay. All right. So this is from the Council on Foreign Relations. So it says, what does the G7 do? It says the Group of Seven, G7, serves as a forum to coordinate global policy, but experts are increasingly questioning the group's relevance. So it says the G7 is an informal bloc of industrialized democracies So the G7 consists of the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, the UK, that meets annually to discuss issues such as global economic governance, international security, and energy policy. Proponents say that the government's small and relatively homogenous membership promotes collective decision making, but critics note that it often lacks follow through and excludes important emerging powers. What are those emerging powers? Those emerging powers are Russia. Russia was one. It says Russia belonged to the forum from 1998 to 2014 when the bloc was known as the Group of Eight or the G8, but was suspended following its annexation of Ukraine's Crimea region. The G7's future has been challenged by continued tensions with Russia and increasingly China, as well as by internal disagreements over trade and climate policies. And a sign of renewed cooperation, the G7 reached a historic agreement ahead of its 2021 summit, which was 2 years ago, to overhaul the global rules for corporate taxation. More recently, the G7 has imposed coordinated sanctions on Russia in response to war on Ukraine, including a cap on the price of Russian oil, which we all know has had a counter effect because now Russia has actually increased the value of its I think it's called the ruble. So its currency is actually increased in value because now Russia said, okay, so you guys are going to be sanctioning me when it regards to my oil and my gas. Okay, hold my beer. I'm going to China. Next thing you know, they started trading in Russian currency, and now the Russian currency is now increased in price, thus making Russia an even richer nation. So it had a counter effect. So it says, so let's go here. It says, the group also launched a major global infrastructure program to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. Those issues, along with climate change, food insecurity, artificial intelligence, and nuclear weapons, led the agenda at the 2023 summit in Hiroshima, Japan. So why was the G7 formed? It says United States, France, Italy, Japan, the UK, and West Germany founded a group of 6 in 1975, provide a venue for non-communist powers to address pressing economic concerns, which included an inflation and a recession sparked by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Communities, or OPEC, oil embargo. Canada joined the following year, and Cold War politics inevitably entered the group's agenda. So really, they're anti-communist Cold War group of nations. Says the EU has participated fully in the G7 since 1981. And so, of course, now they have basically stayed as G7, whereas it's like the G7 is like the more centralized group that oversees and wields the power, whereas it's, that's like the inner circle, and then you have the G20, which is a bit of the outer circle of also somewhat powerful nations, but the G7 is really the nucleus of that G20. So they're the ones that say, how the world is shaped regarding economic policies on the larger world stage. So that's what the G7 is. Okay. So here we go. So as far as the G7 and their GDP, or their gross domestic product, we are now learning that the BRICS nations actually exceed the GDP, or the gross domestic product, of the G7. So this is how we're seeing how it is more powerful. So let me make sure I got, yep. Okay. So I have this ready. So this is actually going to give you guys a stark example as to how BRICS has become more powerful than the G7. So this is an animated chart, G7 versus BRICS by GDP. So I want to share with you guys, this is actually a video that's going to share how it is actually gotten to this point. So I'm going to expand this. So it says BRICS versus the GDP, GDP at purchasing power parity, percentage of world total. So we're starting off at 1992. So from 1992. Now, I want you guys to see this line at the top is the G7. All these colors at the bottom are BRICS nations. G7 GDP is at 45.71%. The BRICS combined is only at 16.5%. So you have 45% or a little over 45.5% versus 16.5% of the gross domestic product of the world. Now, see how BRICS changes. Now, 93, it grows, it keeps growing. We're at 95, 96, 97. Now, if you see the G7 is actually decreasing, as G7 decreases, the BRICS nations increase at a commensurate rate. So now we're at 2005. And as you see, G7 is getting lower and lower, which makes the West more scared. Now the lines are about to converge. And by the time we reach 2014, they're basically closing on being equal. Now they're at equal at 2019. Now here's where the fear happens. Now, as you can see, forecast, the dotted line is 2023. Now, past 2023, we're seeing that BRICS has surpassed the G7. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa is now, these 5 nations are now exceeding the G7. And so by the time we hit 2028, BRICS is forecast to have 33% of the GDP, basically, versus the G7 having 27, a little over 27.5% of the world's GDP. So this is what's scaring the West. This is why they do not want BRICS to grow. And this is just only, by the way, BRICS countries, just the 5 countries. Just a couple weeks ago, they expanded, more than doubled their size. BRICS is now the BRICS 11. So now it is no longer just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I want you guys to realize how massive this is. Right? It is now Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. That's how massive this is. This is how important this is. And this measurement that we see is without those other 6 nations. So the West is terrified right now. Now, the terror is not out of the poor and the working people of the West, but the governments and the wealthy and the corporate powers that are now shaking in their boots. And this is why we need to actually be hopeful about this news. Because ultimately, it is the diminishing power of these Western nations that have a stranglehold, not just on the global South, but on the poor and working people within the West. That's why this is important. So what does this mean? So I want to give attention to a friend that also has had some people on to talk about this, Danny Haifong. Shout out to Danny Haifong on his channel, The Left Lens. If you guys have not, I would love for you guys, and I think you guys should, subscribe to Danny Haifong's channel, The Left Lens, and I will be sharing the link to this video in a second. But he has on Pepe Escobar and Michael Hudson to talk about the significance of what's happening in BRICS. And so we're going to get started right now. And the first person that's going to be starting off is Michael Hudson. And he's going to get his perspective as to what this means for the rest of the world and why this is so important. So, shout out to Danny Haifong for this.
Michael, please go.
Well, I think in one sense, this is a preliminary meeting to set the stage for what's going to come. And all that the BRICS can do at this point is make arrangements among themselves. But the real problem is, what is their collective strategy going to be to break from the U.S. and NATO garden, from the whole economic order that the United States has put in place since 1945? And that requires creating sort of a core group that's going to write up the basic principles. And in a way, what they need is a manifesto. They need to say, here are our aims, and here are some basic principles of how we're going to operate. And I think they wanted to keep the group fairly small for the time being, so that they other countries will have a choice. If you join the BRICS group, the expanded BRICS, you will be part of this overall new order, and it's going to mean breaking ultimately from the U.S.-centered order, because you cannot have the kind of order that the BRICS countries were discussing at this week's meeting, and at the same time remain subject to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, neoliberal economics, and what President Putin himself called the debt trap that is preventing countries from taking an economic independence.
So that's one of the biggest points, is changing the world order away from what we call a unipolar world order. So basically meaning that the United States is the one that's been calling the shots for the world, which is really in an anti-democratic way, because the United States should not be the one, the single nation, the nation that's only 5% of the world's population calling the shots. But that's how it's been. The United States and the West are a very small block of the entire world. They're not the majority. They are the minority. So as you guys know, here in the United States, as you guys can see, who runs the United States? It is not us. You guys all know this as well. You guys are all very politically astute. The United States is not ran by the people. It's not ran by the workers. It's ran by what we like to call the 1%, and sometimes the 1/10 of the 1%. This is also the exact same thing on the world stage from a nation perspective. So you have, for instance, like I said, the G7. And the G7 is a very small block of nations that actually determine how the world is governed. It is really how the world is ran, who determines how the world operates. So you have United States, France, Italy, Japan, UK, and Germany, right? And so because, you have these countries that are basically saying, okay, this is how the world's going to work. The world goes, well, wait a minute. What do we get a say in this? Why don't we get a say in this at all? And then these countries go, well, because we have the biggest economies. We can tell you guys how the world works. We can determine that because we're the ones with the most money. Meanwhile, if you look at these nations, the US, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, they don't have that many resources. Their resources, well, with exception of the United States, their resources are scanty compared to the global South. Excuse me. If you look at, let's say, I think the 54 nations in Africa, they have a massive amount of resources. Massive. But if you look at the G7 and what they have compared, the United States gets some of its resources from the Middle East and Africa, which means that they are exploiting and basically stealing a lot of these resources, along with Canada, France, as we know, as we have been watching in the news, has been stealing the resources of Mali, Burkina Faso, Gabon, right? Niger. Germany also steals resources. They also extract resources as well. Italy also has been doing it, especially in the Horn of Africa. Japan also, they've been using their imperialist powers. And don't forget the UK. The UK is one of the worst actors. So, yes, they have a lot of the money, but that money is based on resources that they have exploited from the global south. And the global south has not had a chance or the ability to really say, hey, you guys can't do this. Why? Because these countries in the G7 and at large the G20 really are the nations that actually have the most killing machines. So really, the rest of the world is being held at gunpoint and being robbed of their resources. So really, they don't have a voice. So that's what's going on right now. Just to expand on what Michael Hudson was saying. So we're going to go just a little bit further. And let's continue, because we're going to expand on something that a lot of people just don't have a grasp on. And I just want to help people have a grasp for this. So let's continue.
Putin gave a very good speech where he said that basically the countries, the colonial epoch of European colonialism has been replaced by financial controls, and that countries cannot be independent until they're financially independent. Well, easy for him to say, because the United States has forced him to be independent, is forcing China to be independent, and is driving all of the countries to be independent. But what his speech said was that the countries of the so-called global billion, he said, have gone to great lengths to preserve a unipolar world as it used to be. It suits them. They're the ones who benefit from it, and they're trying to replace international law with their own order. And but nobody's seeing the rules of this order. So what he pointed out is that this order is just a new kind of colonialism. And he specifically quoted Brazil's President Lula when he said that Lula mentioned the debt burden of the developing economies that they face. Of course, he said, on the one hand, there's this effort to siphon off all these resources, while the other hand, in terms of lending, the relations are engineered in a way that requires repaying these loans virtually impossible, so that these obligations can be viewed as mandatory indemnities rather than loan payments. Well, that threw down the gauntlet.
So as far as what was said by Putin, this basically means is that they are using financial institutions like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank to really keep a stranglehold on the world so that they cannot use their own resources in order to grow. So one of the things that I wanted to do, and some people probably are not aware, but I wanted to share this as well as to what the IMF and the World Bank is and how it has a stranglehold on the world. So I'm going to share this really quick video. This gentleman explains what the IMF and the World Bank do and how they're ripping off poor countries who actually have the resources in order to do better, but because of these institutions, they can't do it.
Go to places like Africa. They don't have a lot of money, and they pitch them.
All right, so let me refresh this so we can hear right from the beginning.
what the IMF and the World Bank does to impoverished countries. So they go to places like Africa, they don't have a lot of money, and they pitch them this idea that if you take our billions and billions and billions of dollars, we can establish all these new businesses and your GDP is going to increase by 200, 300%. But the only catch is you have to allow American companies to be the ones who build these infrastructures. So then African countries take this money from the IMF, and then these American companies come over there and build all this stuff, but then it doesn't work out because they only gave them an infrastructure, but they didn't teach them how to run it. And now,
so basically, it's really just allowing capitalist entities to come in and build whatever they want. But the problem is that they get this infrastructure, they get these loans, they get the business from all the surrounding communities that they can buy from and they can charge from. But of course, they don't teach them how to, implement and use this infrastructure in the correct way. So let's continue.
now they're left in debt because all these fake promises of their GDP going up doesn't happen. And now the IMF come knocking on the door saying, it's time to pay up. And these countries say, well, we ain't got the money. And the IMF says, oh, no worries. All you need to do is give us your natural resources.
Give us your bodies.
And so they just came in, putting them in a hard place and taking the very little that they have because they're stuck in a debt trap with the IMF.
So basically, it is a debt trap. And basically what they do is they say, okay, we're going to give you this money. But in order for us to give you this money, you have to change your policy regarding your resources in a certain way that benefits the West. And so they change it, but of course, they have to say, give their resources over to the West in order for them to be able to get this money. But of course, the money or the resources and the financial benefits from the resources actually don't go to the people. The resources and the benefits actually go to Western nations. I'll give you a good example. So countries like Mali have gold reserves. They have gold mines, right? But those gold mines are not owned by the Malian government. They're owned by France. So even though Mali has the gold to be able to pay so that it can keep its people afloat, keep its people, doing well, it doesn't, because it is being basically, taken over by France. And so, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, they basically operate on behalf of these Western governments in order to make it seem like they're actually doing something good for these poorer nations. But in reality, it's just a manipulation tactic in order to extract their resources and to keep these nations in debt so that they won't rise, they won't do better. And so it's really horrible on its face. And this is why BRICS is so necessary on the world stage. So just wanted to give that as well, because a lot of times people are like, well, how does the IMF and World Bank actually work? And the thing is that they, it's loan sharking on an international scale, basically. That's what it is. International loan sharks. If you can figure that out, you got it. All right, so let's continue. And as far as this goes, so we're going to continue now.
At some point, that they couldn't really discuss publicly today, they're going to realize that if we're going to use our economic surpluses to develop our own infrastructure, our own government spending on basic needs, we cannot turn over our economic surplus to the Western holders of dollar debt. So
that's basically it. It's not taking any of your resources and using it to pay off the West. It's like, no, This is ours. We're going to use it for ourselves instead of having the West come in and invest. Invest what? UK ain't got shit. I'm gonna be real with you. The UK ain't got nothing. What can they give you? What can the US really give you? I mean, the US has some resources on their own, but they don't really have that much. Like, they look, the West needs the global South. The global South don't need the West. See what I mean? And that's the point. But they don't want the global South to know that. Because now the global South is wising up. Just like workers are rising up against the owners of the means of production, right? The global South is waking up and going, oh, wait, we're the ones with the resources. We don't need y'all. Y'all need us. See how this is going? See? Now everything's starting to click, right? Okay. All right. Let's keep going, because this is great. Let's continue. I need to have Michael Hudson and Pepe Escobar on my show.
Things going to give, and they avoided talking about this. All they can really talk about now is how they can support mutual aid with each other, and we're still a bit far away from taking on the West, but that's going.
Did you hear what he said regarding the nations? Let's go back just a few seconds and listen to what he says. I want you guys to listen. This is very important.
They avoided talking about this. All they can really talk about now is how they can support mutual aid with each.
Support mutual aid. Have we talked about this on a more centered community level, right? We've talked about this on this channel. We talked about this on RBN. You hear other channels talking about mutual aid and how it helps the community to be able to develop what we like to call a dual power, right? That's very important, because in order to get away from the capitalist system, in order to get away from a system that's exploitative of us, we have to build a dual power, which means that we circumvent them and do it on our own. We save us. This is happening on a global scale with nations that have been exploited by the West. They're now a block of mutual aid. Think about BRICS as a mutual aid power on an international level. That now it makes sense, right? Now it makes sense that they're saying, oh, snap, you know what? We got a lot of resources between us. We don't need them. Let's come together and share amongst each other so that we can build ourselves up. We don't need the G7. We don't need the G20. We don't need the United States, Italy, Germany, Japan, UK. We don't need them. We got our own backs. This is why the U.S. and the West are terrified. Because here's the point. We are living in a mansion, but there's a very small few of people that are living in the suites and in the master bedroom. The rest of us globally are in the basement. And what are we doing in the basement? We're cooking the food. We're making the clothes. We're making the products. We're all down there, cramped, huddled in this hot-ass basement, trying to feed and do for the small group of people that are on the upper floors. That's what's going on. And we're realizing the rice is down here. The veggies are down here. The fruits are down here. The grain is down here. Right? What else is down here? What is this down here in the basement with us? Right? We have the gold down here, the uranium down here, the platinum, the cocoa, the bauxite, the manganese, the natural gas, the oil, the lithium. We got it all down here with us. We don't need to send it upstairs. We just need to keep it down here with us and do it all and create it all ourselves. That's what's going on. This is why the people upstairs are terrified. Because if we cut their resources off, what the hell do they have? They ain't got diddly squat. This is why they're scared. Germany's not that big. The UK definitely is not that big. Yes, the US is big, but as far as their resources are concerned, they can't match what the BRICS nations got. Even before they had the addition of the other 6 nations. This is why it is dangerous to the West, but it is beneficial to everybody else. When you think about it that way, it makes sense, and it shows that they're building a dual power to circumvent the Western dominance and influence so that they can maintain their sovereignty and self-determination, managing their resources how they want to on their land. That's the point. And as somebody who is a communist, I want these nations to express their self-determination and sovereignty. Because that means that they can do it through a democratic process, right? Remember Bolivia. Remember what Elon Musk said regarding the lithium in Bolivia? We'll coup whoever we want, deal with it. This is basically Western dominance. And taking a country and saying, no, we're going to tell you how you deal with it, not you, your country, and the democratic process, how you deal with it. We're not, no. We're going to tell you, this is ours. We're taking it for ourselves. That's called colonialism. That's called imperialism. But then Bolivia said, what the hell you will. And now they're democratically saying, we're going to tell you how we deal with our lithium. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we do it. Right? And so they're basically saying, no, we're going to democratically decide as a nation how we manufacture and distribute our lithium. And if you want to get down with us, you have to pay the prices that we set as a market. And then when we sell it to you, then the money that we distribute from the sale of our lithium, we will evenly distribute to all of our people, not just to the 1% in our nation. Which means that is a socialist policy, which means that the means of production is owned and distributed by the block of people, by the masses, by the workers in that nation. And that's how it works. But these countries, the G7 and largely the G20, they don't want people to see that. Because if the people see that, then that means that the people in their nations, like you and I, are going to get the wrong idea, which in reality is the right idea. The right idea being that we can do the same like a Cuba, like a Venezuela, like a Bolivia, like a Vietnam, like a DPRK. We can do the same things, which means that we can actually take the model of profit first and throw it away, take away the ability for these corporations really to exploit us. That's the point. So I just want to thank, Michael Hudson for talking about that. That was great. Now let's go to Pepe Escobar and what he says. So we're going to actually, let me continue with Michael Hudson just a little bit, and then we'll go to Pepe Escobar. So let's go.
Each other, and we're still a bit far away from taking on the West, but that's going to be what's happening, and it's the political dimension that has not been discussed in the West at all. So I hope today we can talk about what the BRICS really meant politically. Foreign Minister Lavrov gave a wonderful comment. He said the West is talking only about the BRICS meetings as having an economic agenda. And he said, but that's belittling what we're doing. He said, the West is treating us as an economic club, but it belittles its real significance. We're going to be a political club, and it takes a whole political restructuring in order to have an economic restructuring. So we're not talking about marginal differences. We're not talking about stopping simply at using each other's currencies and denominating our debt in each other's currencies with currency swaps. We're talking about a quantum leap, a basically altogether new structuring. And that's what the West doesn't believe. They believe what Margaret Thatcher said. There is no alternative. And this week's meeting is all about, yes, there is an alternative.
So basically they're saying no more. We are not going to sit here and let you set the terms of how we operate in our nations. And it's beautiful because that's what imperialism and colonialism does. It forces these less developed nations to heel to the demands of the West. And so now they're saying no more. This is it. You had your chance and you didn't do right by us. So now we're going to take our own resources and we're going to take our own work and we're going to do it for ourselves. We save us on a global scale. That was beautifully said by Michael Hudson. I'm going to try to see if I can get his contact information to reach out. But yes, thank you so very much. So now we're going to move on to Pepe Escobar. So he is talking about President Lula of Brazil, just to let you guys know, and some of the things that President Lula has said, which is very interesting as well. Let me go there. Let me see. Whoop. Okay. So, because I'm not going to be playing this entire stream, I want you guys to actually watch it for yourselves, but just highlighting some of the things that was said by Michael Hudson and Pepe Escobar. So here we go.
He talked once again about a BRICS currency, but as Michael said, nobody got into details. First of all, because it's too early, and they don't have the people, the mechanism, the teamwork set up in place to start really analyzing it the way, for instance, the Eurasia Economic Union has, and Glaziev and Mityayev here in Moscow, which I plan to meet soon in the next few days. They have been working on this for over 3 years, in fact.
So he's basically talking about a BRICS currency, which a lot of people were talking about as of recently, and how that if you have a BRICS currency, that could diminish the value of the dollar, or what we like to call the petrodollar. And the thing is that if you diminish that currency, it could spell doom for a lot of people, especially a lot of businesses. But the thing is that that's kind of far off. That's not so close as people may think it is. A lot of times, you have a lot of people, especially within the venture capitalist circles, that are saying, oh my God, it's the beginning of the end if they have a BRICS currency, which they're working towards, which they're talking about. But it's not as close as people think. They're just, getting more nations on board with BRICS. But guaranteed, as we listen a little further, the writing's on the wall and the end is nigh, especially for Western power. But yes, so that's basically what he's talking about. And this is what President Lula da Silva of Brazil was actually talking about. So let me continue. Let's see here. So let's continue to here. Okay. So let's go to right there. All right, let's continue.
Except the 3 Muslim nations. And there was a question of about Africa. They had only 2. That was the very last round of discussions. So they said, okay, who's going to be the next candidate? Everybody was talking about Algeria, but Algeria is practically a done deal. They have very good relations with both Russia and China, and they're going to be part of BRICS soon, sooner rather than later, probably next year in the second batch. The South Americans said, look, this is only the first expansion phase. There are going to be others. So the next one, which is going to be in Russia, at the next summit, the 16th BRICS summit, which will be in Kazan in Russia next year. That's very, very important. Officially confirmed by Vladimir Putin. And
so, like I said earlier, remember what the president of South Africa said. He said that it was going to be the first phase. Remember, so this is already dangerous to the West, right? This first, just BRICS by itself was already having the West going, what are they doing? What are they doing? And so now we just went from a 5-nation BRICS block to an 11-nation BRICS block. But that's just phase 1, baby. They just getting started. So now they're expanding. And now phase 2, they're going to be like Africa. You know what I'm saying? They're looking at the pantry of the world. That's what they're going to be doing. So I'm going to bring up an African map just so that we can have a really good synopsis geologically as to what is going to be happening within these African nations. I'm trying to get the best. Maybe I can use that map. Let me see. Yeah, I think that'll work. Let me take that down. All right, so just to share with you guys that this point. So let me see here. All right, so let's go to 1239. Okay. All right, so let's see what he says.
So in the end, I say, okay, let's get a very strategic African nation that nobody's talking about. Ethiopia. Perfect. It's close to West Asia. It's Northeast Africa. It's close to new member Egypt. It's part of a very strategic Horn of Africa situation that involves the Red Sea, not far from the Suez Canal, you name it. And very rich in minerals and metals. Not to mention unexplored oil and gas reserves, copper, gold, platinum, tantalum, you name it. Perfect, absolutely perfect. So in the end, they got to BRICS 11. So in terms of a master coup, I call it a master stroke for several reasons. But I think the most important reasons, and I would like to hear Michael about that, is the energy angle. Now they control at least 47, 48% global oil production. In the next.
Now, I'm going to share with you guys why is this so strategic? Because this is the important piece that a lot of people aren't thinking about. So now they just got in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is a very strategic spot. So here's Ethiopia, right here at the Horn of Africa. You have Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia. And then you have Kenya, Uganda, and Sudan. There's a lot of oil in this region. And so when you look at this area here, this is a great block because right now the United States is also putting sanctions on Somalia. They're trying to take over Somalia. And then also on top of that, you have right here, right above, is actually the other more Muslim and Arab nations on the opposite side. Actually, let me go here. Let me see if I can get a different map that actually shows. Yeah. All right, I'll just use this one. Okay. Because I want everybody to see where everything is so that you get more of a good synopsis as to why this is so strategic. So here's the map. So Ethiopia right here. Okay. Eritrea is right here, right? If you guys can see my mouse, right? Somalia, Sudan. Here's the Red Sea, right? Here's Saudi Arabia, right near. Then you have Yemen, Oman, UAE is this little country right here, right? Right near Qatar. Then you have Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Turkey. So this is right in that neighborhood. And you don't think that these are also not going to join BRICS besides Iran? Right? Iran, UAE have already are on, and Saudi Arabia are already on board, and they will start their BRICS membership this January. And where do we go to war in order to extract oil and resources? Well, look, we went to places like Iraq, right? And Iran. So now, guess what? These are very oil-rich nations. And so there is fear by the West for us to, there's fear by the West in order for them to be scared, is because they're going to lose a lot as far as the expansion of BRICS goes. Now, let's go back. And there's a little bit more that I want to get from Pepe Escobar. So 13, 14, 15, 50. Okay.
Stage, which is going to be next year, assuming they get, for instance, Algeria, Venezuela, and Kazakhstan. This is going to jump to what? Maybe 70% of global oil production.
Did you hear that? Yo! That is crazy. Crazy. Algeria, Venezuela, and Kazakhstan. We already know that Venezuela got a lot of oil. So in phase 2, if they're looking at Venezuela, Algeria, and Kazakhstan, that's going to be massive. 70% of the oil production being BRICS nations. The petrodollar is done. It's done. It is donezo. This, it is over. Let's continue.
Or maybe even 80%. So this is immense, because now, on top of all that, they control, and this is off the top of my head, maybe I'll be forgetting something, the Northern Sea route, the Arctic route, all the overland corridors of the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Roads. the overland corridors that traverse from Xinjiang across the heartland all the way to West Asia, and then further on to Europe. The Maritime Silk Road, because now they are very, very important in the Arabian Sea, in the Gulf of Oman, in the Persian Gulf, in the Red Sea, and in the Suez Canal. So all that with one single stroke in the chessboard. So I see this as really a master stroke, and it's no wonder that nobody in the West, at least for the past 24 hours, have mentioned anything about how BRICS now is a major player in global energy markets, commodities markets for obvious reasons, Russia, Brazil, Argentina, etc., but also in the energy markets. And that was a result, I would say, the second stage of this approximation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which started by the Russians here. First, they talked to the Iranians, then they talked to the Saudis. In the next stage, they put the Iranians and the Saudis on the same table. And then the ball went to the other side of the Chinese, and the Russians told the Chinese, okay, now it's goal time. And obviously, the Chinese did a messy, and they scored in Beijing. We had the agreement between Tehran and Riyadh of the rapprochement, having a diplomatic relations.
In other words, checkmate. You guys remember the movie? You guys remember the movie Independence Day? This came out back in the 90s. Remember when Jeff Goldblum's character was talking to, I guess, his boss at the cable company, and he's like, and his boss is like, "Whoa, what's next?" And then his character goes, "Checkmate." And then his boss goes, oh my God, David, I need to call my mother. I need to tell her to go to Atlanta. Like, it's funny. It's just hilarious because that's basically what's going on. It's checkmate. Checkmate. Because they're basically saying, yo, you guys think that you guys got us by the throat on the world stage. Well, meanwhile, we got you by the balls. It's over. It's over. And this is why the United States, Italy, Germany, Japan, the UK, this is why they're shaking in their boots right now, because they really don't have a recourse. The only really recourse that they have is militarily and nuclear. That's basically it. They really do not have any other way to get out of this. And they can try to, get Africa to play ball with them. Like, for instance, France is trying to force Africa to continue to play ball. But what just happened over the last recent weeks in Gabon, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, right? What has happened? They kicked France out. They're like, no, get out of our country. We're sick and tired of you guys taking advantage of us and exploiting us. And it doesn't make it any easier. The fact that debts were forgiven. Yes, debts were forgiven. By who, you say? Let's take a look at that, because this also intensifies the influence of BRICS. So let's go for the first in the timeline, China. So let's take a look at this. This article says China forgives 23 loans for 17 African countries, expands a win-win trade in infrastructure projects. So China is already forgiving loans already. They already did. So it says the Chinese government has announced that it is forgiving 23 interest-free loans for 17 African countries, African nations, while pledging to deepen its collaboration with the continent. This is in addition to China's cancellation of more than 3.4 billion with a B in debt and restructuring around $15 billion of debt in Africa between 2000 and 2019. So, and look, the United States is like, oh my God, they have debt traps. Bullshit. Because it says the United States has turned Africa into a battleground in its new Cold War on China and Russia. And Washington has weaponized dubious claims of Chinese debt traps, right, to try to demonize Beijing for its substantial infrastructure projects on the continent. Basically, what the United States is saying, oh my God, they're basically, the United States is basically projecting. The West is projecting, saying, they're setting debt traps for you guys. Can you believe it? What about the IMF and the World Bank? Aren't those not debt traps? We just talked about it a little bit earlier. They're setting up debt traps where they can never repay it. Meanwhile, China's going, oh yeah, these debts that we have with you guys, number one, are interest free. So if we give you guys $1 billion, you guys only have to give us $1 billion back, no interest. Oh, you know what? Let's also build up the infrastructure in that country. Oh, you guys are having a hard time paying us back. Okay, you know what? Forgive the debt. We don't need it back. What? Meanwhile, you have loan sharks, international loan sharks like the IMF and the World Bank that are saying, no, you guys are going to be on debt. You guys are going to be on the hook for this debt for the rest of you, till the end of time. China's like, you know what? No, we don't need it. We don't need it back. You're good. You're good. You're good. And we're building your infrastructure. You don't think that the African nations are going to forget that? The African nations are like Pepperidge Farm. They never forget. Pepperidge Farm remembers, baby. That's exactly what's going on with the African nations. But it wasn't just China. China wasn't the only one who did it. There was another BRICS nation that has also forgiven debt. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's get to it. Let me show you. I shared this article before, but let's see. Russia writes off $23 billion in debt for Africa. That's what Putin did. Oh, shit. Oh, snap. Vladimir Putin, Russian president, says that the Russian government has written off the $23 billion debt burden of African countries. Putin spoke at the plenary session of the ongoing second Russia-Africa summit in 2023, holding from July 27th to July 28th. He said Moscow will allocate an additional $90 million for these purposes. Putin said Russia was advocating expansion of representation in African countries and the UN Security Council and other UN nations. Quote, Russia and Africa strive to develop cooperation in all areas to strengthen honest, open, constructive partnership. Russia will also assist in opening new African embassies and consulates in Russia. He said sovereignty was not a one-time achieved state and must be continuously protected. So ultimately, Putin, of all people, is saying African nations need their own sovereignty and self-determination. You don't hear the United States saying that. You don't hear the United Kingdom or Canada or Italy or Germany or Japan saying that. They're not saying that. The IMF and the World Bank ain't saying that. China and Russia are saying that. And now people can go, well, this is just a ploy because they're just looking out for themselves. Of course they are. Of course. I was in a webinar with the Black is Back Coalition. Shout out to them. And they're also in association with the African People's Socialist Party. And you had people like Chairman Omali Yeshitela also speaking at that webinar. And one of the things that I asked them a question was that, is there a concern that China and Russia are really just doing this as an underhanded means to be more of a imperialist power within the continent of Africa. And in their opinion, they said no. Because here's the thing. The West, and particularly the US and the UK, see African nations as a store to be robbed, to be held up at gunpoint in order for them to steal the resources out of the stockroom and then demand them to go into the cash register and give them also the money. Give me the loot. Russia and China see the African nations as a storefront market that they come in and they go, how much for your lithium? How much for your gold? How much for your uranium? How much do we pay? Oh, do you guys got any rubber in stock? Okay, can we order some of that? So one side, the Western side, is treating it like a victim-perpetrator relationship, or like a loan shark and victim relationship. Whereas you have countries like Russia and China going, it's like a customer, it's like a patron and merchant relationship. See? And then the United States will continuously demonize Russia and China and go, well, they're just doing it because they have their own interest. And of course they do. Just like you have your own interest of your household whenever you go to a grocery store to buy food. You're there for your own household's interests. It's the same thing. It's not any different. And what's so wrong with that, right? They need these resources for their countries, but they're not willing to exploit. They're willing to have an actual working relationship that is merchant and patron relationship with these African nations. That's the difference. They're willing to actually respect these nations rather than exploit them. And that's the point. It's fair. That's what it is. It's about fairness. That's what the BRICS blocks of nations are about. Fairness. And so, because they're doing this, the United States and the West are going, no, this is not fair. But it's like one of my favorite quotes. To the privileged, equality feels like oppression. So the West feels like they're being oppressed because now a boundary is being set. When you're being abused and you start to set a boundary, the abuser feels threatened. The abuser feels like, what are you doing? And the abused person, the victim, is going, yeah, I'm setting the terms now. You will no longer be able to do what you were doing to me before. And so now the abuser is going, oh my God, you can't do this. And the victim is going, I just did. That's what's going on. And so this is why I want to talk about this subject. So that, because the thing is that people like myself I was somebody who didn't really know what was going on. And it is important to realize this because now you'll know how and why the United States starts to maneuver in the way it does, especially with those of us here at home. Because as the United States moves and what it does on the world stage, it does in a microcosm within its own borders. And so now that the world is basically saying, nope, you can't do this. Now the United States is, guess what they're going to do? They're going to take it out. They might start taking it out on us. But this is why it's important for us to try to change the system from the inside. You see, now you have the attacks against the empire from the outside. Now we're on the inside, and now we also have to start a death by 1,000 cuts, right? On the inside. Remember remember The Incredibles? Where at the end of the movie, Bob figures out that the only thing that can damage it is itself. From the inside. Right? You see, in a sense, there's allies on the outside. But who's in the underbelly? You and me. This is why if they are building dual power outside of the United States in order to inflict a blow to the Western hegemony, we have to inflict a blow from the inside to stop the Western hegemony so that we can actually have a better system for the workers and the poor within the imperial core. So it's a two-pronged thing. They gave us the signal. The bat signal's in the air, baby. That's what's going on. Are we going to heed it and go, all right, let's start getting on the ground. And even if it's in mutual aid within small little tight-knit communities. Like, for instance, I have the Orlando Mutual Aid chapter here in Orlando for Revolutionary Blackout Network. That's what I have. What are you guys doing on the ground for your neighbors? Right? It starts really, very small. But you guys can also be a part of it. And the thing is, it's not necessarily destroying America. It's saving America from the corporate dictators that are running our country into the ground. Mutual aid is self-defense against the imperialist powers. That's the point that we need to bring home. Listen to what they're doing. Watch what they're doing outside of the United States and conduct yourselves accordingly. So, did you like the stream? Go ahead and give me a like.